Such the classic, you know.
Yourself in front. Alright. Microphone. Thanks on. Can we hear me? Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm a loud American. I probably don't need a microphone, but I'll go for it. Alright, so welcome back to yet another exploration of technology, but in keeping with the tenor of the day, we're going to talk a little bit about theology. And call this your get out of jail free card, the card that you're going to give to every ministry professional that kind of sort of wants to believe that there is nothing that God talks about. God doesn't talk about computers. God doesn't bless your work. You're just a support staff. Trust me, this is your get out of jail free card. This is your I understand what God has called me to do session. Because for all lack of intents and purposes, we kind of get lost. We do that. We that do IT, we get lost. You know, the marketing people, they can make their own argument. They can. And, it's really easy, to design something, a nice little infographic that says, I count. Oh, but David was arrayed in purples and linens, and that took a marketer, to upsell that. Well, yeah, probably. And, Paul was the greatest marketer ever. I mean, he had King Agrippa talking about something. I don't want to, ad block Jesus, I don't want to do it. It's time that we had that as well. And what's missing in a lot of respects is a piece of the discussion about the theology of mobile ministry. Now, I will, preface this and say that there's no such thing as a theology of any kind of service-oriented anything. But there is a way of thinking about our gift, our leanings, as it means as a thing that we do to serve God, a worshipful endeavor that we use to serve God. And so, whereas yesterday I had a lot of stories, that's not happening today. We're going to kind of talk. I'm going to be very much more teachable on today. A little bit more teachable. You'll get a little bit of what I get when I'm sitting in front of some clients and we're chatting. Chatting them ever so nicely about what it means for their organization to move forward. In this case, I hope to elevate what we've already started in our devotional times and kind of take the conversation forward again. We're going to talk a little bit about mobile ministry, obviously, because you can't get a theology of mobile ministry talk without talking about what mobile ministry is. We're going to talk a bit about some biblical arguments for mobility, technology, service, and ministry. And we're going to do that in a bit of a shared discussion. I'm going to give you some scriptures, and you're going to look at me with a strange face and go, I never thought of it in this light. And then you're going to look at some more scriptures, and you're going to go, I still never thought of this in this light. And you're going to say, Antoine, you're taking the Bible out of context. And so we're going to talk about some historical arguments. Because as fun as the Bible is, it does kind of stop at Acts, but the calendar didn't really stop there. So it's really cool when history affirms what God has done. So we'll talk through a little bit of that. And then basically what that ends up going to be meaning to apply this idea of a theology of mobile, or really a theology of technology, to other endeavors. Because what we really want to do, we don't want to say God bless our work and not really understand what God thinks of our work. We really want to say, hey God, is this work able to be blessed? And if so, let me continue in it. And if not, well, career changes happen to everybody. David went from a shepherd to a king fairly quickly. If we're okay with that, we'll go ahead from there. That works? All right. So let's first start off with definition of mobile ministry. Okay? We'll start off with, the easy part. To me, the easy part. Okay? Now I'm saying the definition of mobile ministry because I want to kind of frame your brains. Okay? So we got a lot of mobiles in the room, and then those who might be watching the video that I'm attempting to do again. They may say, okay, I got a mobile device in my hand, but what do you mean by definition of mobile ministry? I've been doing Mobile Ministry Magazine for the better part of 11, 12 years. After a decade, you're supposed to forget those numbers or something like that. But I think LinkedIn remembers. I don't remember. All right. But I've been doing it so long, you get to a point where folks ask you, why do you do what you do, or why does this mean what it means, and can you explain what it means? And I was like, sure. And 8 minutes later, they were still looking at me with glassy eyes, going, that sounds cool. You know that face. Sarcastic, not exactly. But I just learned Australian sarcasm. It was my lesson. Wasn't exactly, that sounds cool. It wasn't really one of those. It was more like, stop talking. And a lot of times we get that. We're trying to explain what it is that we do, and there's really not a small version of it. So I actually embark on an exercise. I try to fit an explanation of anything that I do inside of a tweet. 140 to 160 characters. All right, if you don't do Twitter, inside of a text message. But I try to fit what I can do. If I can get it into that statement, it doesn't mean I've encompassed everything, but it does mean that I've got it small enough that everybody else, I can let them figure it out on their own from there. So that's kind of what I did with this definition of mobile ministry. I got it down to a tweet. Woo! Great communication, right? All right, so here it is. The skillful use and application of technologies and behaviors that we call mobile for fulfilling religious practices. Antoine, there's no Jesus in that. I know, it couldn't fit. Just kidding. All right. Well, Antoine, what do you mean technologies and behaviors? Well, I had to unpack that. And honestly, at the 7-year mark of Mobile Ministry Magazine, that's exactly what I attempted to do. I attempted to actually create a definition of mobile ministry. And by that point, I had written about 3,000 some odd articles, so I had to go back and read everything that I wrote and figure out what a common thread was. And I found these common threads. Mobile talked about technology, hardware, software services, applications, and then there was mobile as behaviors. The kid on his phone all the time, the folks using mobile in vertical settings, mobile wellness, health, all of that good fun stuff. And I said, oh, look, mobile's got 2 definitions. It's both technology and behavior. Cool. That part got easy. That's it. Well, what is ministry? Ministry is anything that we do, official or not, that takes faith from one person to another. I know, it's this super simple definition. And every good theologian that's watching this, including my mentors, will yell at me. I like it. But it's a really simple definition, and it's one behind that you don't have to be a ministry professional in order to understand that. I'm taking something that I hold dearly to believe, and I'm passing it to somebody else. And whatever I'm passing, it could be a behavior, it could be a practice, it could be a sacramental, it could be history, it could be any number of things, but I'm taking my faith and giving this to somebody else. And I said, okay, all right, I'm getting down there. So the definition of mobile ministry was like this, about this long. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. So I got it down to a paragraph, which really wasn't going to work. And then I got into those college sentences. You know what I mean? Those ones that don't have like nothing but commas and semicolons all over the place. They span about 3 pages, it seems. But it really is just one sentence. And I said, yeah, that's not going to work. I got to get it down to a Twitter-sized definition. And so this is what I'm going to leave you with, the Twitter-sized definition. Mobile, any computing. So anything that we define as a computer that you can pick up and take with you. That means anything from a laptop all the way down to a watch. Okay? I'm ignoring, for the moment, embedded technologies. Okay? For the moment. Okay? I'm mostly ignoring desktops. Mostly. All right? But I'm thinking about devices that you can pick up and take with you, things that change shape, that change context, things that are either your magic wand or your canvas. Mobile phone, magic wand, canvas, a tablet. Okay? Things that go with you. All right? And then you're doing something to make the faith go forward. You're sharing content, you're reading the Bible, you're doing a reading plan, you're listening to music. Whatever that practice is that's happening through this magic wand or this canvas, you're doing this in order to take the faith forward. Cool? Mobile ministry. That's not that bad. Kind of makes you feel a little bit better, You're like, oh, okay. Wait a minute, Antoine, you just kind of said that everything we do is mobile ministry. Sure, I did. That's why this is not an academic session. It's a theology session. That's why we stop here. We talk about some biblical arguments. It's like, so how do I prove? How do you prove, that technology to forward the use of faith practices actually makes sense as a statement? Because, every academic person that I know, they have chewed me a good one. You can't say that. You can't say that, Antoine, just because you downloaded a Bible application that you're engaged in the practice of mobile ministry. Sure I can. I can actually say the whole workflow there, from the development of that application all the way to the person that sold it to me. That's all mobile ministry. Just so happens that it ends at the point of me transforming to becoming something like what God wants me to be, according to what I call faith, Christendom. Then the academics to get mad because there's no relativism in that statement. I just told them that faith exists and a continuum. From the building of the servers that serve me the device, all the way to the miners whose materials are going to be necessary for me to actually receive the device. Mobile ministry includes all of that. That's cool. Take me to the Bible. Prove it. Because that's all a good theology will say. So, I'll go to my first scripture. If anybody wants to pull it up. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 to 9. This is totally a snippet because in PowerPoint, we do not put whole paragraphs on a slide. It's also a theology of PowerPoint. If you've never seen that before. But I did pull out a snippet here because it's actually pretty cool. Deuteronomy chapter 6, 1 to 9. God's talking to Moses, and it's really an intimate conversation, but it's the intimate conversation that the judge has with the person he's about to jail. Kind of intimate conversation. And he's like, here is the law. I love you, but do this. And here's more law. And I love you, but do this. And so we're in the middle of this law-giving moment. And in the middle of this moment, God is, giving Moses some really clear instructions about how the faith is to proceed. And he goes in, and this is one of my favorite portions. It says, bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. Or, if you're from the seedier parts of town, get some jewelry and some tattoos that say exactly what you stand on, and make sure you paint your walls differently. That doesn't sound mobile, does it? That sounds just like, faith lived out. But that's just it. Ministry is a practice. It's something that I do to take the faith forward. And in this section of text, this chapter 6, 1 through pretty much the end of the chapter, God's like, this is what you're going to look like and how the faith is going to go forward. Okay? So, first lesson of mobile ministry, it has to move. It has to go forward. Next scripture, because, it's more fun that way. We all know this one. We're all missionaries, or missional, I should probably say, since I got video. Go ye therefore into all the earth. Movement. Make disciples of all nations. Do something. Teach them to do what you do. Baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Smack them upside their head and dunk them in some water. Or immerse them in the Spirit of God. Immerse them. What does it mean to immerse somebody in the Spirit of God? Really easy. Find a teenager. Figure out where their head is looking at in Facebook. They're immersed in whatever's on that screen. I'm not equating baptism to Facebook. I should probably preface that. But I am equating baptism to immersion of an experience. And to that end, it's amazing what a mobile application can do. It's amazing what a playlist can do. I was very disturbed this morning when the Wi-Fi went out. I had some praise music in my head, and I didn't know the rest of the words. I wanted to play the music. I wanted to be immersed in a song, and I couldn't be immersed in the song. While I was moving about the room upstairs getting changed. It's just a piece. Next, James, chapter 1, 22 to 27. If you've noticed, I've probably picked the most contentious scriptures that ever exist in the Bible for a reason. I like contention. So this was hard. It says, if anyone's a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man looking at his own face in the mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and immediately forgets what kind of man that he was. I should probably have appended that unless he posts on Instagram. There's something about being seen using this technology that causes other people to want to do it as well. And there's this really cool copycat reference. There's a psychological trait to it. I really just forgot the term. It's in my notes. But it's where we basically mirror each other. We do what other people do in order to be accepted by them, in order to find a commonality with them, in order to make a common approach with them. But it's really interesting as it relates to technology. We actually copy what one another does, even though we don't see each other doing it. I heard that there was a video about cockatoos that talk crazy in gas stations. Just because I heard about it, I went ahead and did a quick search for that. I didn't think cockatoos were that mean, actually. So I'm actually looking for that video. But we start doing things that other people do, either because we heard it or because we've seen it. Hey, I seen you, were you checking your time when you were walking? I was like, no, I was looking at my heart rate. Looking at your heart rate? You mean a watch can do that? I was like, yeah, I need to know whether I'm going to see the Lord in 5 minutes or longer. But we use this technology kind of as a mirror and not as a mirror. And it's really neat. This is one of those, it sounds like a selfie. True, really, it does sound like a selfie. James tells us we shouldn't do selfies, we should do panoramas, which is really interesting. The whole chapter, that whole section, is do a panorama, not do a selfie. Which is neat. It's like, okay, cool. You're telling me that there's this encompassing behavior that happens with the faith that I may or may not have paid attention to before. Because there's an end piece. This is my favorite scripture. I have to actually commit to not using this as a password ever. Because I always tell folks, this is my favorite scripture. I get excited about the unity in God that Jesus prayed in John 17. I get excited. I get overjoyed. And then I remember something. Facebook has done a better job of unifying people than any nation has ever done, ever. Ever. It's impossible that 1.3 billion people really like the exact same ugly user interface. That cannot be right. But it's true. You don't know why it's true? Because that person that you went to school with 20 years ago that you have nothing to do with and you really haven't thought about pops up in your frame and they want to know how you're living your life. Gosh, I pray that they might be one, even as I am one with the Father. Yes. But it's really neat when a whole movement happens in that. What happens when the whole church decides to get on board with a technology? A little more than a decade and a half, half a decade ago, about half a dozen years ago, I was interviewed by the BBC. It was a really cool radio interview. Enjoyed myself. They asked me what I think about faith. Had a really good conversation with the young lady. And she and I, we talk a couple times a year. She actually checks in. And she said, how are you doing? I still follow you. I still understand what you're doing. She doesn't want to become a believer, but she still wants to follow what's happening in faith and mobile faith. And I was like, cool, this is great, Lord. But after I did the interview, a couple months after, she called me and said, hey, Pope John Paul II, before he left, made a statement about technology and faith. He basically said it was wrong and he's cursing everybody, to kind of summarize it. And I was like, hey, no. This avenue is one of many that God will use in order to bring his people together. And if we all get on board with it, and we all move at the same pace and the same cadence, it's going to be a really beautiful thing. And so my quote was in the article. How far it is. You can guess how much work from the Roman Catholic Church I've had since then. I didn't have much at all. But then the new Pope came into office, and this really cool thing happened. You guys all saw the picture, right? You saw the picture of everybody with their mobile phones up, and they showed the picture of the last time a Pope came in, and it was all like Polaroids and like 2 mobile phones, and the next time it was like 6, and then the next time it was like everyone. Because somebody got the idea that if we all do this together, if we all sharing this story together, if we all see what God is doing together, then maybe, possibly, hopefully, we might be able to push this faith together in the same way, in the same cadence. Now, of course not, we're not going to all do it the same way. You know, there is very much a body, Paul, mentality when it comes to this faith. Everybody does have their different parts they're going to play. But what happens when we all walk together? When we all recognize the head and the foot is allowed to be the foot, and the legs are allowed to be the legs, and the hands are allowed to be the hands. We start looking like this prayer being answered. Super cool theological point before I move on. This is the only place in the Bible where God prayed that we would answer the prayer. Think about it. Wait for it. Now, to all the linear people who are listening, who are like, Antoine, you can stop at the theological stuff for the moment. Can we talk about the proof of this, the historical arguments? Is there any proof in the fact that technology was used in some way, shape, or form to move us forward? And then I'll look down and I'll say, well, you're writing on paper. You're probably using a composition book. You likely have read the Bible before that was pulled off of a printing press. You probably used an ink pen, Bic, or its derivatives, Penguin. They were all believers who wanted to push the faith forward and use the technology of their time in order to do so. But I'd argue that we have a good, some of those arguments kind of speak for themselves. Historical arguments. Why would you build a road? Why did the Romans build a road? They built a road to get military supplies from one place to the other. Seriously, only reason to build a road. What did they find along the way? People got tired, so people set up shops. Who set up the shops? The people who wanted to make money and the people who wanted to bestow kindness to others. Where was the best place to find Christians? Near those shops. On those roads. Did they necessarily agree with the fighting that was going on? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depended if their house was being burned themselves. But they did have an agreement that they would use the technology of its day to push the gospel where it needed to go. I put writing in here, unless you're a fan of Socrates and you hate the idea of written language. Hate, despise. If you write it down, your memory goes kaput. That's pretty much what he said. Then you understand that writing has had this really cool way of conceptualizing, maybe limiting, the way that we think about faith. Well, at least that is if you write in a Latin-based language. I find that Arabic is a really beautiful language. You can't understand lick. I find it's really beautiful because each stroke, when they talk about God, each stroke actually denotes a characteristic about Him. Which is pretty cool. Imagine just using a character to denote the presence of God. There's nothing in the English language that does that. The only thing that's closest to that is the cross. Or the chiro. But imagine in a language if you actually have a word, a letter, a series of symbols that actually denotes the presence of God. That's really cool. That's what writing has done. Designing around governments and behaviors. It's one of my favorite parts. One of my favorite historians, church historians, is Eusebius. I like to read. I like to read a lot. I'm a troublemaker. I read contentious stuff. And Eusebius writes about the history of the church. He compiled the history of the church from the end of Acts all the way to his time, roughly the time of Constantine II. But one of the really cool parts that he sticks out on, he has this whole section where he talks about how the government pushed the gospel forward. Basically where the church got accepted by the state and literally hand over fist, everybody became a pastor the next day. It was totally the dot-com boom of ministry. Because what ended up happening is that the government was basically saying, every time that we affirm the Christians, our empire does well. So let's go ahead and make a few laws instead of killing them every 10 years or so. That's what we were doing. So they would make a few laws, and then all of a sudden, the body of Christ would start doing some really cool things. Hey, we can now actually have a church instead of meeting at home. Hey, we can actually now run a business that not only makes a little bit of money for that goddess, that goddess, that goddess, that goddess, but when they come in here, we give them a God coin that says Jesus is Lord. Eusebius was cool. I like the way he wrote about that. But it's really interesting that the way when Jesus does well, when God does well, when the Christian faith does well, how governments change. They, in a sense, kind of agree with the fact that, yeah, we want your benefits, but we don't want your God. But we find this over the course of history. I can't wait till America finds that again. Yes. Maybe. A more recent issue or recent item that I've ran into, because when you dive into missions, you often run into the fact that folks can't pay for everything. Finances is just difficult. It's just flat out difficult. Resourcing is incredibly hard. And so, the entrepreneur brain in me would always like, well, why don't you just start a business that pays the mission? And then I found out there's like a whole cottage industry called business as mission. I was like, really? That's cool. How do you do that? Well, we go buy a whole bunch of land over here. We set up a school. We set up a repair shop. We do this, we do that, we do these, we do those. And then when the people work for us, their condition is that they have to read part of the scripture. Really? You can do that? Well, in this region we can do that. In that region we can't do that. We have to call it ESL, English as a Second Language Training. Really? Yeah. oh, that's kind of cool. So wait a minute. Well, yeah, see, they want English as a second language because English offers them the opportunity to earn some more money. We just happen to offer them a job while we're teaching them English. So the mission can pay for itself. I said, well, how about that? Using the structure, the infrastructure of the land in order to figure out how to get the gospel forward. This is happening. It happens regularly. We mentioned a company the other day, LifeRay. It's one of the things that they actually enable, LifeRay. One of the things they enable BAM opportunities. It's really cool. If you ever get a chance to listen to their CEO or some of their leadership team speak, please go. Listen to them. Because what they do to enable Christ to move forward doesn't look normal. It doesn't. And it challenges what you think. Are we supposed to make money with the gospel? I thought the Edomites and the Nazarites told us that we're supposed to give all of our stuff away. They did. But there's also resourcing that happens, and it's kind of cool. So there's some historical precedent. So don't get it wrong. Don't get me, wrong. This doesn't mean all of this is the rule. But in part of developing this theology of mobile, we kind of have to go down that route. We have to figure out what has happened. I'm a fan of studying the history in order to understand the present, so that I'm best prepared for the future. And since I talk about mobile ministry all the time, and I was trying to make a living from this thing, it was really a good idea that if I was going to have a theology of mobile ministry, that I grounded somewhere near history. Near. Okay. So my next step, honestly, was trying to ground this idea. So how do I actually apply theology to mobile? Because it can be really simple. I mean, honestly, it can be very, very simple. It can be as simple as, I have a word from the Lord and I text you the word from the Lord. It can be that simple. It can be incredibly complicated. Jaron's data set and 5 fish. Woohoo! Man, that was complicated. Meta tagging, all those content, shorting it down, compressing it, putting it in the right bucket, and then building an application wrapper around it with some graphics that people will understand in every country, because we can't afford to make gospel graphics for this application that's specific to the color preferences for every country. Ridiculously hard, but it's still the same method, same approach. So I want to first talk to just a few technologies and behaviors, some things that as I was trying to unveil or trying to figure out exactly what this theology of mobile looked like, I said, let me start pulling some pieces apart. So the first part of that definition, we said, mobile ministry is the use of mobile, applied across technologies and behaviors. So I need to break apart this. What technologies and behaviors was I really looking at? So I looked at a few things. I looked at tools. And my tools were everything from written words, scripted language, I'm writing on a notepad, all the way up to writing it with Eclipse, playing with a SourceForge, working with a GitHub, tools, just the whole bucket. I said, okay, how does this work? Now in my case, this is not everyone's case, but in my case, it meant that I had to go and understand every possible permeation of tool that was available and slightly keep up to date with it. That's really not easy. Beyond that, I had to figure out what are the focuses or the motivations of developers and marketers, those other stakeholders. Because their intentions, are to instigate by the use of a technology a particular behavior. Okay? We don't write a newsletter just because we want to talk a lot, but we write a newsletter in order that we can get some supporters to understand what it is that we're going through and hopefully continue to support us for yet another quarter. Okay? What are those motivations? What are those stakeholders? Who are those stakeholders? And why do they matter? Then there was the idea about usability, accessibility, and access. Who can I give this to? Who's going to want to get this? In 2003, 2004, when I started Mobile Ministry Magazine, I really was not quite thinking about Papa the Kitty. I really wasn't. I was thinking about the pastor in the local congregation that had a Palm Pilot or didn't have one and somebody else did. But very quickly, that rose really fast to, hey, Antoine, how do you think about people from other contexts? How does somebody who reads from right to left think versus somebody who reads from left to right? It really does change the complexity of your application, just reading from one direction to another. There's a whole cultural shift that tends to happen. So I started to walk through that. And as I walked through this piece, this section, I got a phone call. Hey Antoine, we have a developer summit going on with Qualcomm. would you be so nice and come out to LA and speak on a panel? Huh? Speak on a panel? To developers? Okay. What's the panel on? Well, they're trying to actually figure out opportunities for mobile, and, well, you do a niche that they don't even know about. Oh, cool. All right, cool. Free trip to LA? Score. In Las Vegas? Score. I'll go. So I went to Las Vegas to speak at a Qualcomm event. It was the Uplink event. This was Qualcomm's really big developer conference, really big then, they're kind of big now. This was the year that they made the transition from Java to Android as their focus. So everybody and their mama was showing up at this conference, trying to figure out where they were going to get their next dollar from. And I'm sitting on a panel with a couple of mobile luminaries. And I say, these are guys that, you know, their day job is sitting with CEOs, kicking them in the pants and saying you did it wrong. And I got to sit on the panel and they said, so who are you? I'm just Antoine, right? You know, I run this little magazine website, Mobile Ministry Magazine. I help faith-based organizations better understand the implications of mobile. Really? I've never seen that wave before in my life before that point. But all these heads went down, business cards came out, and at the end of that session, there was about 200-300 people in the panel session. Second person that came up to me, the first person, he was a little bit weird. But the second person that came up to me was a person who worked for a major phone carrier. And the major phone carrier, she asked me these specific questions. Can you help one of our very big clients, who's an extremely large faith-based denomination who doesn't want to work with anybody else, but they have to work with us because we're the carrier? Can you help them? And what do they need help with? They don't know what tools to use. They don't know how to talk to our SDK. They have no idea of best practices. Can you help them? Tools and behaviors. I said, oh, okay, so what is it they want to do? Well, the group is named. I'm obviously not naming that group on purpose. And I said, well, yeah. They are kind of big. And they do want to shape your behavior by the faith technology that you use. That would be really cool. Sure, let's talk. Pretty cool. But that's part of understanding this definition, or at least this approach of mobile in ministry. Part of the questions I ended up asking her was like, okay, I need some help. What do they want to get out of it? What are the approaches? What makes sense? Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, none of us want to be looking at a screen all day. You know, we were just talking in our prayer triplets, we escaped to that bench as fast as we could because this day was beautiful as all get out. We want to be there. We want to have the missions, you know, our mission, business's mission, we want to have is making people scuba dive. I run the boat that sends people out scuba diving. They can go behold the glory of God, and when they come up off the boat, I give them a towel that just says, Jesus love you. Something simple. We want it easy like that, right? We ask, what are those outcomes? What is it that's supposed to happen when they engage in that technology? And I broke it down and got to two questions. First, at the intersection of faith and mobile tech, what kind of effects personally are we asking for? How are we asking that people personally get affected by this content? If I offer to you all of the gospel audibly in your language, and I provide that to you in a nice convenient playlist, and you can walk through the Bible at your own leisure, what am I expecting for you after you finish listening to all of that? How am I expecting you to respond to God after that? Is your faith supposed to look like mine? I go to a predominantly African American church. So does that mean you get to do cartwheels in the middle of service and shout hallelujah? When I went to a Catholic church, you didn't do that as much. What kind of faith are we personally? What are we seeing from the inside? How are they going to respond to God? How do we want them to respond to God after they've engaged with whatever mobile ministry is? The other question, just as important, what effects to the community should we be looking for? We're going to build an application, and it's a kids game, and the kids game is going to be a Bible game. But the Bible game that we're going to build, this kid gets a version of the Bible, a piece of the Bible, this kid gets another piece, and we randomly assign pieces of the Bible to kids in the same geographic area, and they have to find each other and say hello, and connect their Bible together. Straight up real world art, a real world role-playing game. No, that does not exist. Free idea. What happens when the kids start connecting with each other and their mobile device is the only point of agreement that they have? They're not playing hide and seek anymore. They're playing swap cases. Oh, I got a case like that. Oh, I got a case like that. Here, we'll switch. You ever gone to the mall and you watch families interact with each other? Tweens and below, they're holding on tightly or trying to run away from the parents. And then the teens, they're walking really far away from their parents. Their head is completely down. They don't trip over anything, mind you. They have mastered the art of ignoring parents, texting, tweeting, watching a video, and asking you for money. Right? Is that the kind of community that we want? Or do we want the kind of community where folks are saying, hey, listen, you gave me a mobile device and that's all well and good. We also need to teach our students science, social studies, mathematics. I'm glad that you gave me a Bible. Can you also give me other resources so that we can connect them to social services so that we can elevate? These effects, these outcomes of mobile ministry are things that, you tend to ask in a theology, because theology is about spiritual transformation. It's about taking you from this spot in God and going to that spot. Whether it's higher or lower, or happy or sad, we won't determine that. We can't determine that. What we know is that it's going from one spot to the other. That I went from an unbeliever and every piece of faith was opaque to now the strongest thing in the world. 1 Corinthians 13. What are we transforming or getting them into? And then when we get them there, oh boy, what do they change? What changes in them? What changes around them? Which is fine. Yeah. That big carrier didn't necessarily appreciate those questions because honestly their answer at the end of the day was make more money. But the faith group that they were working with had to answer those questions, otherwise they wouldn't have given them the money. They had to figure out, honestly, and I know we sometimes hate to hear the ROI thing, but we honestly needed to know if we're going to invest the time in making technology work, what's going to be the return? And how we're going to measure that return. And it may not be a hard number, it may be something stupidly simple. Okay? The Basecamp team just wanted to finish projects on time, so they built their own project tracking system. It just happened to work really well. The Slack team needed to communicate a little bit more effectively, just a tiny bit. And email wasn't exactly working for them. Neither was the suite of content management systems that they were using, nor all the other open source or not so open source services that everybody was patchworkly using to connect those communications together. So they built something better. Simplicity, focus, enabled them to change personally. Every person that worked for Slack and Dropbox, those teams, they changed personally. But then their community changed as well. Because when you start getting time to not have to move files around and deal with comms, you start being able to do some other stuff. Sit on the bench and watch a sunbird. So, I'm going to leave you-ish, at least this section of things, with a few questions. Because trying to contemplate or trying to get yourself to a point where you're saying, okay, this technology is great, technology is good, God, how do you want us to use it? There's some questions, along the way, some things worth asking, some things worth either appropriating, whether into a devotional time, or just appropriating maybe into your team meetings time. You got a team meeting and part of your team meeting time is actually culture building, character building. Okay, here's some things to just throw out there. What designates skillful use versus foolish? Proverbs chapter 4 says, in all thy getting, get an understanding. Then right before that it says, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom. And you're like, cool. But the person that doesn't get wisdom is described as a foolish person. And very quickly we actually find a linear relationship between wisdom and foolishness. Okay? Everybody starts with knowledge, that we learn something. We have the intimate elements of something. We move up from knowledge to actually understanding. We figure out what it does, how it's best applied in context. How we apply understanding designates whether we have wisdom or foolishness. Wisdom is the skillful, positive application of knowledge. Foolishness is the unskillful application of knowledge. The whole book of Proverbs proves this. So when we build something, or when we acknowledge something, where we say, okay, this app might work. What wisdom are we working to, or is there a piece of foolishness that we're working toward? We can ask that question. We can go in and say, what are some of the effects to local traditions? There's a really cool book. I recommended it to someone already. Where Are You, Africa? Really good book. Pastor Gagoma is pastor in Tanzania, 20 some odd Catholic parishes. And he writes in this book about, he's logging the effect of a mobile phone in the communities that he's a parishioning over. And it sounds really cool at first, because I'm reading this excited, like, yes, new groups, they got mobile. But he comes to this one story. There was these two warring factions, one on this side and this side, and there was only one place where they didn't fight each other, at the one phone that was between the two. There was one landline there, and they did not fight there. That was the oasis. The phone, that one phone was the oasis. All right? And he says, he thought it was amazing. He was like, you'll kill each other. You know, you won't let your daughter marry your son, you know, all that fun stuff. But when it comes to that phone, we're friends. Mobile phone gets introduced into the culture. Wars break out. There was no oasis anymore. There was no common place for them to congregate anymore. He had talked about another story where he said, we have ladies who make $42 a month, or a year, was one of the two, but their cell phone bill was $45. And they would rather go hungry and make the kids go hungry, and only just to keep 5 minutes on that phone. 5 minutes. And then they wouldn't even trade the minutes for money, as it happens in other parts of Tanzania, Kenya, or Nigeria. They would just keep the 5 minutes, because being connected was more important than eating. How does that change the culture? We have to consider, what practices of the faith are we going to keep, or are we going to lose? John Dyer writes from the garden to the city. He says, we used to, before everybody could read, sing a hymn together. And then everybody could read, and so we all opened the hymnal together, and the rustling of pages, because there's always a few people who aren't able to get to page 333 for Amazing Grace by the time we get to the second verse. Okay? And then we went from that to these glowing screens. And we go from the glowing screen of your hand to now we have a projector, and we go back to projecting and up on top. And how does that change? And he talks about how the shared voice has come back into the church, because now we can all see the verse at the same time. It's not us all humming, sitting down. Oh, we're not there. We're not all doing that anymore. But then he writes later, in a follow-up to From the Garden to the City, he talks about how in his church, the bright light of an iPad is an extreme distraction to older members. He says, literally speaking, the false light of the computer is drawing the people away from the light of God. We never thought of it in that context. But it happens, especially in our older churches. I mean, older building churches where it's a little more dim. It's nothing like the bright light of an iPad to be a distraction. What have been some of the outcomes of mobile ministry? How have some of your organizations changed? I don't have to answer that. You can. I know from all of our organizations that mobile has been disruptive, positive and negative. Mobile has caused us to actually change the structure of one organization. It was really neat. Really, really neat. Antoine, phones will not show up in the Amazon 6 months later. Hey, Antoine, there's a phone in the Amazon. I said, cool, what are you guys going to do about it? We don't know. We're going to take our really young guy who likes you a whole lot and tries to emulate you, and we're going to make him the head of all things digital, because we don't get it. And he's going to be, it's his job to figure out how to make it make sense for the company. Wait a minute, so they did an org change based on a phone showing up out of the deepest part of the Amazon where there's no signal, but they were using it. Okay, that kind of makes sense to me. What did that mean for their business? Well, they actually ended up going into geothermal power after that, because people needed power in order to use those mobile phones. And geothermal was the best way for them to work inside of the cover, the canopy of the Amazon. And it meant for them, as a business, that was also a mission. They were able to do some things that they weren't able to do before. They were able to create economic opportunity as well as forward the gospel. Kind of neat. Simple or change, or not so simple. And then I had to ask the hard question. And I say hard for me because I almost cried when I said this. What isn't mobile? Did you guys know that a mobile phone is not mobile? Most people use a mobile phone when they're sitting on the toilet. When they're sitting at home, relaxing at night. There is almost nothing mobile about the mobile phone except for the fact that it doesn't have wires. And it's like, well, that's stupid. Why do we call it mobile if we're not going anywhere while we're doing stuff? Because the marketer's dream is that you're tapping to pay everywhere, and that you're checking in all these different places, and that you're spreading your metadata exhaust all over the place. But the truth of the matter is, most people don't travel but about 6 to 8 kilometers outside of their home residence every day. As a matter of fact, it's so much, we are so conditioned. We do the same thing all the time. That there are some researchers that have actually been able to figure out, based on how you ping off the cell tower, exactly who you are, how much money that you make, what device that you're using, and what device you won't upgrade to. Just from the cell phone pings. I'm like, well, shoot. Knowing this information, I'm going to change my course. I'm going to go 8 miles the other direction. Didn't work so well. But it's like, well, then what is it mobile? Is a tablet mobile? Yeah, kind of, sort of, maybe. I would think so. I take it up, I pick it up, it goes with me everywhere. It's got Wi-Fi to it, cellular sometimes. I'm able to get data, and actually do some mobile-like things. I got Apple Pay on my iPad, so I can go pay for some things, I have some transactions that happen. But is it really mobile, or is it still something, is the computing, is the behavior, is the transformation in mobile ministry on that tablet device something that transforms me physically from one thing to another? Am I actually getting up and moving? Is it provoking me? My wearable is, I consider this mobile because this makes me get up and move. I have to watch my steps. And you can't really get your steps by standing in place. Oh, you kind of can, but that's a cheat. And you can kind of get your steps by sticking it on the dog and let the dog get the steps for you while you sit down. But I had to figure out, okay, well, what isn't mobile? An SDK really ain't mobile, but it creates mobile ministry. That's an important distinction because it's part of that puzzle. It's part of me understanding how God is fitting this in. And I think that those questions are safe, that those questions are appropriate. I also think there are probably some questions that we shouldn't ask. Now, mind you, I'm a deviant of many sorts. I went to Catholic school for about 8 years, 4th grade to 12th. Yeah, I went for 8 years. And somewhere in my 4th grade year there, because my mother really liked this church and this parish so much, we went to a parish that was outside of our community. I was clear across the city. But we went there so often because my mom wanted to prove that we lived around the corner, that he said, well, listen, you're not Catholic, but none of your classmates really come, and I need an altar boy. Would you be interested? Sure! That could be something to do during church besides sit, stand, kneel, sit, stand, kneel, sit, stand, kneel. Good for me. So I became an altar boy without ever being baptized Catholic. It was kind of cool, actually. I could never take communion. But I was always the best person to do confession. Confirmation. Because whenever an archbishop came in to do confirmation, all the other altar boys were being confirmed. Except me. Which, I think, Cardinal Bevilacqua probably picked up on that by the second time. But what was really interesting, because I had those behind the scenes, I could ask some really cool questions. Hey, what's that secret prayer that you say? That one they say right before the host turns into bread and wine. What's that prayer? You're not supposed to ask that question. You're not even supposed to ask. It's not in the book that you can find either, I looked. But then there were some bigger questions. You would ask, hey, it's really great that you're doing this mobile app. I really appreciate it. Are you also working with a school? Because your app is pointing to their parents, but the kids that are using the mobile device. Do you have anything that's filtering that direction? Nah, we don't have the resources for that. I said, you got to. You can't talk to the parents without talking to the kids. You have to talk to the kids. All right, cool. I said, hey, are you guys doing anything in terms of pregnancy tracking? In terms of abating rape and other sexual issues that are in this community? No. We just make them download Bibles. Got a question for you. Some of these ladies need help, and if you get them on the side of the gospel, then everything else works out. There's some questions I can't ask. And there are probably some questions in your organization that you can't ask either. Hey, we say that we're a giving community, that we're a giving church. But how come we only give 1% of our offering to missions instead of 10%? And how come they always say that they're underutilized, but the marketing people, they always got something newfangled and shiny? Can't they go on a Sabbath or a respite for this season so that we can fulfill the other areas? There are probably some questions that you can and shouldn't ask. There's a really cool question that God asked me. Young lady said, Antoine, you're really cool. I really like that you do the tech thing. You're spot on. Can you go without that for 12 hours? It took me the better part of a year to figure out how to go without a phone for 12 hours. Figured it out. Go to sleep. 12-hour nap. Can you go without this thing? Can you, as Pastor DeGoma was talking about in Where Are You, Africa, can you say that the mobile phone works as a wallet, but also show them how to actually budget their resources? And if you're not willing